Thanks all of you for coming. My friend who talked me into doing the book was so funny. When I really did it, she said, "Marion, you were so honest." I used as my example Katharine Graham's book. I loved it so much, and hers was very, very much what I wanted it to be. I was very lucky. I grew up in Chicago, the city I love, and I also had the marvelous experience of being on the stage when I was very young. We danced at all the big theaters in town, the Chicago, the State and Laker, the Marlboro, the Granada, those that are gone. And it was the most marvelous experience I ever had. The book is named The Show Must Go On because that was my education. Things happen, good things, bad things, cues being wrong, but you never stop. We had, actually, we did all kinds of steps. Our teacher was very strict, very good, and we learned everything. We learned tap, we learned toe, we learned ballet, and we continue to improve every year. I started when I was 5, and I lasted until I was 14. I would have gone on the rest of my life, but my father, who had experiences with young models, decided it was not the life for me and said, "That's it." And in those days, you did what your father said. So that was the end of our wonderful dancing career in Chicago. But they moved from the theaters to the Palmer House, and Miss Abbott, who was my teacher, stayed there, and she was the one who booked shows the rest of her life as long as she lived at the Palmer House. But the thrill of really being part of this group that became not only well-known in Chicago, but actually internationally well-known. The Abbott dancers were lovely. She was strict with us, and it worked. And the last group that went to the Palmer House went to Brazil. So you knew we were spreading our wings. But I really thought, where will I get an education like this? You just keep going. If anything happens that's wrong, take a deep breath, stand up, and go forward. If I cry, it's because, you do. Anyway, I had a wonderful background in that, and that's why you know my title. The show has to go on, and it went on all through my life. Then one afternoon, I was in California and offered a really big screen whole program, and told to come back and that he would get me started. This was one of the top producers in Hollywood. And I was so excited, I thought, oh good, I'm going to get to be a star. So I went home and told my father, and I got the same answer, no. And I was really devastated. I thought, this is no fun. I want to be able to do some of those things. But I again listened and stopped. And so I had to really sit down and think, what am I going to do with my life that's exciting? Well, if I can't be famous, I'll at least do good things for people. And that was my mantra forever. So I started, and I came back and thought of the things that I could do that would be helpful. It was just before the war, and my fiancé-to-be, he had asked me for 9 years to marry him, and I finally said yes. When I learned that we were about to fall into the war, I joined the Red Cross. And I was there every day from 8 to 6 for a year. doing all the things that everybody had to do, wrapping bandages, knitting sweaters, crocheting afghans, everything that we could send overseas that would be helpful. While I was doing this, my husband came back, very fancy in his white uniform. He was stationed at William Field in Arizona, and he said, "We have to get married now because I have a leave," which meant we had a 10-day honeymoon. So we did. We had one of the war weddings where you got a bridal dress in 5 minutes, you had the wedding planned, and we had all of 32 people because we couldn't get everybody there. But we had a lovely time. We ended up living in Arizona for 3 years, and considering that the war was going, he was in charge of training fighter pilots. And he loved the flying. He had joined the Air Force before the war, so he was what they call one of the early flyboys. And we had a very nice life. We had a cute little house, we had a good marriage, and we had a lovely little girl. Kathy was terrific. She was, I'd say, this big and walking and talking. The first word she learned was flower because we were in the garden all the time. And she really brought joy to all of us. Well, then things changed, and I went back to Chicago, and we moved to Winnetka, which was wonderful, and I raised the girls there. It was an interesting time because I started doing PTA. Clarine Hall, who's a good friend of mine, who many of you know, we started the Children's Fair maybe 100 years ago, and it's still going in Winnetka. Those are the things I think that give us joy, that things have lasted. So I decided to go back to school and get some extra education in social work. I was busy going to school from Winnetka, and it's a long walk. So I go to the University of Chicago, but I finished in the year and then went over to Cabrini Green by myself, became the head of Lower North Center, and found that I could really help the young girls there. Teach them basic things, basic hygiene, and teach them how to get jobs. And it was a very successful program. But I wanted to have something exciting for them, so I decided to do a fashion show. We did. I taught them what to do, and I also taught them, this was very cute, that if you accept an appointment with somebody, call and let them know if you're coming. If you're not coming, tell them. So many of them had the bad habit of never responding. So one day, this cute little girl came to class, and she said, "Mrs. Simon, I'm sorry I can't be here today." I said, "But you're here." She said, "We don't have a telephone, and you told me I had to let you know, and I'm here to tell you." Well, that was a wonderful success story. She learned, and she learned it to remember all her life. So we had our fashion show, and things went well, and I left the class with the young women there. At that point, Cabrini Green was a village. There was no drop-by shooting. They had new apartments, they were thrilled, but they really didn't have the courage to go out. No, to go into a restaurant, go to a drugstore. They certainly didn't know what a clinic was. So I brought everybody into them, and they really were able to learn a great deal, and they continued doing this. Since I was the head of Lower North Center, we had a very low budget, and I thought, I'm never going to get anything done. So I called up Elliot Donnelly, my friend who already had 2 other centers going, and we joined them because they had a bigger budget than we did. And to this day, Chicago Youth Centers, I'll cry, is still going. I bumped into Sidney Epstein, who is one of the men who who was the partner with Elliot to make these really wonderful children's centers. And he said, Marion, I really am so excited. I want to tell you, this was just last week. We have the best director we've ever had. So it keeps going. Excuse me. After that, I decided that I wanted to really develop a career. And at that time, young women were allowed to take their professional background as volunteers, add something to them, do whatever, and become a really professional. So I went around telling everybody, I'm going to go to work. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was 55 when most people retire. But I wanted to do something and give something back. And finally, I was able to do it. And I started a program at Michael Reese Hospital for patient advocates. It was the first one in our city. I then got it started at all the other hospitals. And to this day, we have another success. 40 years later, and it's going strong. So you know, you don't have to be afraid. You just have to have guts and do it and stick with it. And I've told it to a lot of young women who don't really feel they can start something. You can start it. You can start it and keep going as long as you do it the best way you can. Before that I had started this, I had been asked to do a large fundraiser for Reese, for medical research. And that is so easy compared to everything else, because everybody can use medical research. So they're willing to pitch in and help you. We raised a lot of money, and when I tell you how much money I raised all my life as I got involved with the city of Chicago, you would be very pleased. Millions and millions. Millions because we weren't afraid, but we also listened to what advice we were given. When we were talking about raising the money and what kind of system we used in those days, we did benefits. And benefits were where we sold the tickets and made the money. But we also learned that we went to the heads of whatever group it was that we were trying to get money from and tried to sell them a bigger picture of what they should give us. So one day we had this gentleman from the Amalgamated, see if I can say it straight, the Meat Workers Amalgamated Union, a really tough gentleman who said to us, you ladies are nuts. What makes you think you can raise all that money by selling tickets? No way. Do what we do. Work all year to raise your money and celebrate that night. So that became the formula for the crystal ball for the next 50 years. And it's worked, and it made people happy, and they found out they could do much more than they thought they could do. And that's always a happy feeling. So I was the first woman chairman of the medical research group and kept them going for a while. And interestingly enough, the women who did the crystal ball worked for a whole year. They would be selected the night of the ball and work the rest of the year. And while I was doing my advocacy at the hospital, I worked a lot with all the young women to give them courage to keep going, and they were really very grateful. So in any way that you can help young people, do it, because they need it, and today they need it more than ever because there is so much competition. Well, let me see. That's not the whole story. As I go on, we add and add and add, and I add across the city. We did that, and then I joined the zoo. My very good friend's father put together the zoo board, and she said, you have to go on that board. And I said, I can't. I had all these events for the Chicago Youth Center. We did wonderful movie benefits then because we had the movies. And you see, I had had the experience dancing on the stage. We danced between the movies. I don't know if you remember that, but they had shows between the movies, and then people enjoyed those, and we had fun playing jacks. But the thing is that there was so much to be done, so many places that we could continue to be helpful. We did all of the movie benefits and had the visiting really important people come. When Burt Lancaster came, I thought, oh my God, he's so handsome. And so I asked him if I could just look at him, and he said yes. And he was so nice. Then Julie Andrews came when she did Mary Poppins. That was such a thrill for me because when she won the Academy Award, I sent her a note. Not only did I send her a note, but I got back a written note. And of course, I've saved it. The next thing that I got involved with was the zoo. We decided, the few of us were there, and Margot knows because she was at the zoo in the early days, Margot Morris. We really were so thrilled to be able to make things happen. My good friend Hope McCormick, Marshall Field, and I started the fundraising. And it was fascinating. He called me and he said, Marion, Bob Pritzker is a good friend of mine, but he's also a friend of yours. Would you please ask him for a gift for the education building? I said, sure. Then I found that I wasn't going to get what I hoped I would. I got $15,000, which was a lot of money, but not enough to do what we wanted to do. And I called him back and I said, Marshall, I'm sorry. That was the best I could do. He said, that's fine. So then we left Bob alone. Didn't go back. Sometimes after you ask people for money, you will go back again. Or you will stay away from them a long time and then go back. So I will tell you the story of magic. When I was doing the advocacy work, and that was the kind of program where we did a lot of malpractice prevention, we would discover if doctors were really paying attention to their patients. If they paid attention, their patients were grateful. I remember once when a doctor had a patient, for no reason at all, they amputated the man's leg because he had a blood clot. And I was a basket case. I thought, what can happen? They loved him so much, they never got upset. If you had physicians that didn't really talk to you, pay attention, they would sue. So we learned how to be very careful. One day a lady came into me and she said, I have a cockroach in my Coke. So I said, would you like another Coke? You have to do something. Anyway, we went on and we were doing all kinds of helpful, wonderful things. Then I went on to the next thing. When I started my program, I was asked to come to the hospital and humanize it. That all sounds very nice. Well, first of all, the nurses thought I was a spy. The volunteers all thought, what's Marion going to do that I'm not doing? And then the social worker wouldn't talk to me for a year. So you learned to really make a difference and keep going. And when I left, the social worker cried. But I will tell you that there is so much to do today to be helpful, and people need much, much more help getting through hospitals than they used to, and many of my friends are still in the same field. and still trying to do what they can to be helpful. And another thing that would interest you is that there is a young surgeon that I know who is studying to teach surgeons to pay attention to people as human beings. And you're doing this, spreading it out all over the place. So we have really, done things that were helpful and continue to raise money. When I was doing this work at the hospital, both the Pritzker men would come in for breakfast every day because their father was very ill. And so when I came to work, I'd sit down and have a cup of coffee with them and visit and talk about everything. One day, I really was full of mischief. I thought, I'm going to ask him, Bob, what are you really going to do about the zoo? He had been asked for a year to really give a big contribution, and he kept ignoring it. So he turned around, put his arms around me and said, Marion, you know I love you. How's $1 million? Well, I almost fainted. It goes to show what can happen, and that's the Children's Zoo today. And he's very proud of it. So we've had all kinds of experiences of raising money and raising it so that it's successful. I worked until I was 70 thinking, well, I think I'll stop. Well, along the way, I was asked to do a program. And is Terry here? Terry Hesser? No, I guess she hasn't come yet. Terry is a wonderful producer. We were asked to do something I couldn't believe. We were asked to teach 11-year-olds how not to get AIDS. I didn't know what 11-year-olds were doing. And I went to the infectious disease man at the hospital, and we put together a wonderful, wonderful committee, and then went to magnet schools to ask for help because we had to get permission to say the word condom. And we did everything we could to put together a program that would be worthwhile. The money that was given to me to start it came from Citicorps. They came back and they said, we want you to hire a teacher. We will give you more money because your program is good. We did a pre-test, we did the lesson, we did a post-test, and everything was fine. We had a cute little boy. Terry had professional help, good actors and so forth in the program. And one of them was sitting in the front row when they asked, do you know what a condom is? Yes, yes, yes. What is it? It's one of those apartments on Lakeshore Drive. So you had lots of fun along the way. Anyway, it worked, and we won a Golden Award, and they used the program in the schools every day for about 20 years. Now, I'm sorry to say, the man who made the DVD retired, so we're going to have to find. When people say to me always, Marion, what are you going to do next? I think if I said nothing, they'd pass out. So I think the next thing I would do would be probably to go and have this redone, because I talked to the education department, and they have this DVD is on the reserve shelf. Nobody knows it's there. And they stopped using it when the man retired. So what I'm going to do is go back when I finish all this stuff, and I will have it made into a disc, take it back to the teachers, and they can then start passing it out. But the program was really wonderful because when we started it, we didn't know what we were getting into, and we were very successful. So we went from one thing to another, raising money as we went along. And when I got to be 70, I thought, well, I think I can slow down. But that's not what happens. somebody called and asked me if I would raise money for Roosevelt University. Being a graduate of the University of Chicago, I wasn't that anxious to, because Roosevelt was a sleepy place, it was run down, and I wasn't excited about it. But then I thought about it, and I thought, it's a wonderful building, it needs improvement, we can do something there. And so that's what happened. And I will say this, we had more fun with the benefits we did for that. We did what turned out to be a regular cabaret evening with lots and lots of famous people. Itzhak Perlman, Rosemary Clooney, Michael Feinstein, one after another that were really terrific. And then the most exciting thing that could happen was that I was able to get Bill Cosby. But not only get him, he came free, and he didn't do that for anybody because he liked the kind of school it was with open admission. So he said, I will do this if you really raise more money than you ever have. Well, I had never raised $1 million for Roosevelt. I had for other places. So I thought, fine, I'll do that. Well, in the middle of it, I fell down playing tennis and busted myself up. So I did it from bed. But we did it. And my daughter came to town. She was living in St. Louis then, and took me to the benefit of a wheelchair. But we did it, and I never forgot. It was a wonderful, wonderful benefit. And when I talk about doing benefits, it's as if you think that's the only thing I think of, but it's not so. It's one of the only ways that you can really pull in enough people to raise the kind of money you want to raise. And I will say that when the invitations went out for the Bill Cosby thing, people answered them before they got the invitation. And they knew what was going to happen. They would always say, Marion, who are you getting next time? I had wonderful people who worked with me. We put a board together that had people from all over the world because I wanted them to represent what Roosevelt was. We redid a lot of the building. And one of the funny stories was I was working on what's a little, I guess you'd call it, a little program room for concerts. That's Gaunt's Hall. We had to do everything. It was so run down. We did the carpet, we did the walls, we did everything. But we didn't have the famous, really magnificent electroliers. The electroliers were as big as I am. So you can imagine how impressive they were. Well, when we had the cows in Chicago, we also had visitors from Switzerland. They came with Lucerne strings and played a concert for us. There were a couple of little ladies wandering around. I had had a flip chart with pictures of what it looked like before, what it looked like now, and what I hoped it would look like. And they looked at it and said, can we find that? I said, sure, it's downstairs. I'll be glad to take you. I didn't know them. I had never asked them for anything. And they looked at it and they smiled and they went home. About 3 weeks later, I got a telephone call. Now, I'm never sure I can say this straight. The Benevolent Ladies Society from Switzerland called me up and said, would $100,000 be helpful? It was exactly what we needed. So you can see what happens. Don't ever be discouraged if you're raising money. It comes back when you least expect it. So that was my life, going from thing to thing. raising money when I could, making things better for everybody. That was the mantra I gave myself when my father said no. It was hard to accept the fact that dreams like what I was given when I was a little girl couldn't be realized. But when I realized all that I've made over the years, it's not so bad. And then, at the very end, I had a tragedy which I didn't anticipate. My two daughters died a year apart, the same month. And I who never gave in to anything and who kept going, said, I don't want to do anything. There's nothing I can do. I felt just so lost. And then I gave myself a lecture and I said, you can still do things for people. My older daughter had lost her kidneys overnight with no warning because of bad medical care. So I decided I'm going to find a way of getting good medical care to people if I can. And so we developed with the Kidney Foundation here a kidney mobile. It's a very well-equipped traveling car that tests people for three things: hypertension, diabetes, and kidney disease. And it has been so exciting in saving lives. Most people don't know when they have hypertension. A lot of them are learning more about, from all the weight that's gained, the diabetes. But then the kidney disease, you really have to have a doctor tell you to look out for it. And this doctor didn't at all. And I, of course, didn't know because Kathy was living in St. Louis then with a wonderful physician. And she said, okay, Mom, you'll see. I'll get a kidney in a year. And I thought, oh, sure. The lists were 5 here, 12 there. And I thought, I'll take her someplace in the country to get one. But she got one, just as she said. And she had a kidney that worked beautifully for 7 years. But then with no immune system, other things happened, and Kathy had to give up. Tony had fought hers for 13 years, breast cancer that she had had 2 times of the, the whole system of going through the prevention. And she was very lucky because the one person who was so darling and the head of it is now married to Larry Goodman, the head of the hospital, and a wonderful person. So Tony had good care, but she couldn't get away from it. So the 2 of them died a year apart. And I have to tell you a cute story. I have a friend in Greece who lost a son around the same time that I lost the girls. And she could not accept it. She just couldn't. And this woman is what they call a mystic who works, in Greece too. And her daughter was so worried that she would really, really fall by the way, got a hold of this woman to give her what she wanted. And she told her where her son was and what was going on. And if any of you have watched Katie Couric in the afternoons, she always says, is there a heaven? Yes, I think there is. And so I know that my girls are together and doing fine, and I'm at peace with it. That brings us up to the end of me as far as what I'm doing. I'll go back and work on the AIDS thing, but you never know, there might be something else. I feel fortunate that I have had the luck of being involved with all the wonderful people that I have. Of all of you good friends, when I see you who came because you were interested, I was thrilled. Writing a book isn't so bad. Getting it out is terrible. Anyway, everybody, I thank you so much. I may have left out things here and there. There are candid stories about families and love and things like that. When you read the book, you'll know. And so I hope you enjoy it. If you want to ask questions, fine. Otherwise, thank you very much.